working on this theory that I call the slow time process, where I believe there's a formula for success in our personal relationships, where we benefit from having an adventure together. That's step one. And then two, waiting for some organic, spontaneous combustion of life or conversation, or those deeper yearnings of the soul to bubble up to the surface. That takes slowing down time with one another, the slow time process. And out of that, we mine this eternal treasure. A good example of this, one of my favorite stories my wife has of my kids. There was a time early on in our lives where I was working a lot, and she was wrestling with this overwhelming sense of like, I need help. And so we were talking a lot about getting a full-time nanny, like many of our friends had, to unburden her with the babies at home. And she was in the backyard, magic hour, it's dusk, the sun is setting, it's a beautiful view, really heavenly moment. She's on her hands and knees with our kid, who is on all fours. They're both acting like, they're acting like cheetahs. And she's letting him lead the play, and he starts lapping up milk out of an imaginary bowl. And she joins him, and they're lapping up milk, and he looks up in this moment and he says, what happens when we die? And for her, when she tells that story, it's this deeply revelatory moment where she recognized that you cannot substitute those meaningful moments in life with some kind of schedule, and you cannot replace being there for those moments with, there's no substitute for that. And so for her, it was a recognition that like, I need to be there for my kids, and I need these moments, this slow time in between the adventures that we have, to be there and wait for this, for these like deeply meaningful questions to come up, so that she can imprint on him her beliefs. And that was transformative for us. And I'm in my life now, especially with my career, the rate that we're going, am very actively trying to mine for treasure in the time in between the adventures that we have. So I'm being very intentional about being with my family, with my wife and my kids, without electronic devices, without work, without any ambition for the future. And I am seeing a huge difference in the dynamics of my family and my marriage in doing so. So if that's true for our personal relationships, that there's treasure to be mined in the slow time between the adventures we have with our colleagues, our family, friends, is it not true that God would operate in the same way? I think when we hear things like, as in heaven on earth, that our reality reflects a higher reality, would the same not be true? Is that not a reflection of the way things work? That God wishes to be in a relationship with us where we have our active adventures, like reading scripture, going to church, communing together, having Bible studies or small groups. And then we go away and we have our slow time process with God, where some deeply revelatory truth will bubble up to the surface, or our soul will reveal to us like where our hearts really lie with certain subjects. I believe that that's true. And so it's concerning when there's a new article, a new survey out from the Public Religion Research Institute that highlights that more than a quarter of Americans now identify as atheist, agnostic, or religiously unaffiliated. This is a survey of 5,600 US adults, the highest level of non-religiosity in the poll's history. Deeply concerning. So if it's true that that's the slow time process, if that's what we're going to call it, in our personal lives is beneficial, I would argue that it's true in our relationship with God, our spiritual life. But if we're missing the adventures that spur on those conversations that allow us to have the slow time in between, I think we're missing a huge piece of what we really are, and some of the conversations that matter most. It's understandable. Derek Thompson writes in The Atlantic this great article called "The True Cost of the Church Going Bust." I think he highlights what's going on here in a really interesting way. I'll just read the first paragraph of this article. It's well done. He says, As an agnostic, I've spent most of my life thinking about the decline of faith in America in mostly positive terms. Organized religion seemed to me beset by scandal and entangled in noxious politics, something I agree with. So I thought, what is there really to mourn? Only in the past few years have I come around to a different view. Maybe religion, for all its faults, works a bit like a retaining wall to hold back the destabilizing pressure of American hyper-individualism, which threatens to swell and spill over in its absence. I think another way to say hyper-individualism, which I totally agree with him here, is relativism. This religion of relativism, what's right for me is right for me, what's good for you is good for you, seems to be the thing that replaces religion or deep, true, honest spirituality. And I think it's proof that we are, that's not a good policy for societal well-being. I think that we need a barometer that exists outside of ourselves. I think that comes in the teachings of Jesus Christ. And I think we are in a post-Messianic era where we have all that we need to find a path forward for our lives that is deeply meaningful for us and for those around us. What does Christ tell us to do? In Matthew 6:6, he says, when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. Maybe it's true that Jesus is aware and gave us an example of a life where he enjoyed the slow time process with God. And that out of that came this unbelievable legacy of love, one that is still talked about today by millions, billions of people, and one where it's clung to honestly and not something that becomes entangled in noxious politics or scandal. That we have something that is good for us and for society as a whole. But if we miss the adventure with each other in that regard, in the spiritual regard, and we don't take the time as Jesus here asks us to, for the slow time process with God to take place, we are missing something of deeply eternal value. And I think we should inject more of that into our lives. So whatever that looks like for you and I, the imaginary lapping up of milk as cheetahs in the backyard with those we love, so that the organic bubbling up of our souls needs are heard. Let's have those moments with God in this slow time between the adventures.